Hi guys, today I'm dying to talk about Netflix's latest limited series, Sirens. This is starring Megan Fahey, Julianne Moore, and this new actress who I am not familiar with the name of, but she is absolutely fantastic in this show. I'll flash her name on screen, but she is incredible. And frankly, the entire lead cast here is phenomenal. Kevin Bacon shows up. He's excellent. Julianne Moore is like a generational talent. I think Megan Fahey is also just completely crushing it. On top of that, I really liked at the start of this show how well defined all three of the sirens, all three of these lead women were. I thought they were genuinely like excellently like well realized characters. And the basic premise of this show is that Megan Fahey's character Devon is traveling to Kiki's estate or like lavish mansion because her sister Simone works for her, and they've been out of touch because while Simone has been working for Kiki, she's essentially left her old life behind, right? And her old life includes our main character Devon. So does that make any sense? Estranged sisters. Basically, Devon, played by Megan Fahey, is going over to this mansion to try reunite with her sister. And as she's doing that, she starts kind of suspecting that maybe Julianne Moore's Kiki is the leader of a cult, or there's something sinister going on, or she's like mind controlled her sister, and like, have you taken my sister away from me? Essentially, it's kind of the rough outline of the plot. But the reason I'm struggling to explain the plot is because it kind of goes in seven different directions. On one hand, this show is about really intense subject matter like generational, familial, like trauma and like really heavy stuff too, which I really appreciate. It really did remind me of Midsommar in terms of the family trauma that's been explored. And on top of that, the kind of like newfound family in cult sort of vibe. So on the surface, when you start this show, it really does feel like it's going down the exact Midsommar parallel, with the intense family trauma and like finding family and comfort in what is actually a dark place, but you perceive it as a good one because it's better than where you've come from. But as the show kind of continues, it starts pivoting in all these really interesting, sometimes good, sometimes bad directions. And I think that's why everyone's been so split on this show. It's absolutely crushing it ratings wise. Like everyone's watching it, but it's hard to get a consistent read on what people think of it. I think first off, people are expecting a supernatural vibe from this show. And for a while, it feels like the show is really leaning into that. And I actually can't tell if the show is trying to sort of communicate like there is something slightly supernatural going on, or whether it's meant to be kind of commenting on paranoia or the way we always judge women harshly. Like part of me thinks maybe the Siren title is referencing the way we consistently blame women for men's actions, like the whole term witch and the witch trials were basically a product of that. And I am wondering if the messaging of this show is leaning into that because the true monster is something different. But at the same time, like very early on, it does feel like it's communicating like clear, strange, supernatural imagery. Like it's quite bizarre in its messaging, and it almost feels like it demands a rewatch given where the show goes. But I do want to praise it before I get into story details. So I do think the core performances here are genuinely fantastic, particularly the woman who plays Simone. Millie Alcock is her name. Millie Alcock. She's excellent. Strangely enough, she is surrounded by a stacked cast. Kevin Bacon, Julianne Moore, Megan Fahey. These are all top tier actors and actresses. But this woman, she is phenomenal. Her sort of micro facial aggressions are incredible. And I just found every scene she was in, I was incredibly like just fixated and hypnotized. I thought she was genuinely like an excellent commanding screen presence, and she was simultaneously like really empathetic and also very calculated and smart. On top of that, yeah, I thought all the other performances were good. I found the writing a bit strange in this show. It's obviously going for more sort of eat the rich satire that we've been seeing lately. But I felt like in this show, it didn't particularly land. There were a lot of scenes where it felt like it was sort of suggesting like, oh, look how bad this rich person is. Look how bad this woman is for making these demands and blah, 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 blah. But a lot of the time I was sort of sitting there being like, rich or not, that would kind of be annoying. There's a scene early on where Simone had, ordered for Kiki's event, white hydrangeas, these types of flowers. And the way the scene was scripted when they had blue hydrangeas, it seemed like what the show must have been suggesting was that asking for white hydrangeas was an unrealistic request. Like, they don't exist, right? It was like asking for clear Coke Zero or something, right? But then I Googled it and no, white hydrangeas exist. And I was sort of sitting there like, um, yeah, I don't know. I'd be a bit disappointed too. She's putting on a fancy event. Like, I don't actually think she was that bad. They like got the order wrong. And there's sort of these moments throughout the series where I know what they're trying to communicate. I know it's trying to be an eat the rich satire. Look how bad these kind of like privileged people are to the people that work for them. There's this consistent running joke around text group chats about how awful Simone and Kiki are. But truthfully, a lot of the times it didn't exactly land because I thought, contextually speaking, at the end of the day, they've hired these people to do jobs and they're doing the jobs badly. And maybe they come off a bit curt, but I actually really didn't think so. I've worked at McDonald's and I currently work in fields where I deal with worse interactions on a daily basis most of the time. And I feel like if the show wanted to really go for this eat the rich, nasty person satire, they really could have turned it up to 11 and I don't know, written it better. Like, it just wasn't fully landing for me. I didn't particularly find Julianne Moore's character Kiki particularly that bad for a lot of the show. Towards the end, she does start doing some pretty out of pocket stuff, but even then, you kind of get the emotional place it's coming from. And again, this might be intentional, but even with our core character, Megan Fahey, feeling like she needs to get Simone out of this toxic environment, and this might be a strength of the show, I wasn't particularly on her side for a lot of it. Truthfully, given their horrific backstory, their horrific family trauma that's revealed to us throughout the show, I kind of understood why Simone would want to get away from all that. I understood Simone not wanting tattoos anymore and wanting to grow away from her childhood and not wanting to be there around her dad, especially given details we find out. And I kind of was struggling with the messaging of the show at times because it felt like it was trying to communicate through Megan Fahey's perspective sort of like this loss of a loved one, how awful it was that Simone was turning her back on the family for this rich, privileged, lavish lifestyle. But truthfully, not only did I find the rich, lavish lifestyle sort of compelling on surface level and sort of go like, oh, who wouldn't want to live there? But on top of that, even emotionally speaking, I understood why Simone would want to leave that behind. And in a weird way, I almost found Megan Fahey's presence occasionally kind of an oppositional force when I feel like I was meant to be rooting for them. And on one end, this might be good writing, all right? That the fact that all these conflicts and all these characters are so multifaceted and each character you can kind of understand their perspective on some things and be against them in other perspectives. But on the other hand, I do feel like the show was really trying to be an eat the rich satire and really criticize Julianne Moore's character for a lot of it and have us really root for Megan Fahey's struggle. And for a while, that just wasn't connecting with me. There were these consistent, like, kind of run-ins I was having with the writing in this show where I was like, this moment really should be landing, and it's just not quite. So I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite things about this show was that it was 5 episodes, yet somehow that, like, towards the end, there were multiple points where I was sort of like, I feel like we're wasting time. I feel like we're not getting this really interesting, juicy character drama. Big kind of moments would happen where I'm like, am I meant to feel something here? There's a proposal at a certain point that I really wanted to kind of be shocked by or really invested in, but I didn't really know how a character felt about this character or whether this was an outlandish thing given their relationship. It was a lot of sort of like telling and not showing at times. The other thing I want to mention is this show looks absolutely awful. Like, absolutely awful. It was really a shame because early on I was watching it with someone and they kind of were checking out and going on their phone and reading their Kindle, and occasionally they'd be like, is this show any good? I'm like, the acting here is fantastic, but this show looks like dog shit. Like, so much of the lighting looks ethereal, and not because it's meant to look like a dream sequence. The dream sequences look fine, but there are so many scenes that are just completely washed out, or when it's dark, you can't see anything. Like, it was an absolutely painful visual experience for me. I thought it was a really bad looking Netflix slop looking show, which is a shame because the performances and the writing at times are really, really solid. And I even like the subversion with what they're doing with the title of Sirens and where it kind of like twists that. Now, I know a lot of people were hoping for more of a supernatural direction throughout this show, and I get where they're coming from there, but I actually like the twist. I like where the ending goes. I think the journey there is what kind of kills this show. So many moments you're in conflict with characters where you're like, I wish I knew more about this character. I wish this was a conflict I understood more of, because at so many points things would happen where I'm like, was this meant to land as like a really well-earned moment? Because it feels like it's coming out of nowhere, and not in a good way, in my opinion. But in order to get into that more, I need to get into a full spoiler talk. So leave now if you haven't seen the show. Overall, it's probably like a 6 out of 10, maybe a 7, but I feel like it had so much potential to be incredible. And the reason I say that is because I actually really like the ending here. So, spoiler talk. 3, 2, 1. I actually really do like the ending. I like that it almost feels like a Greek tragedy. Like Julianne Moore is essentially, she loses her power and her status because essentially Simone, her kind of like assistant, replaces her and takes her husband Peter, played by Kevin Bacon. And I've heard the criticism that people didn't really see any chemistry between them, and I actually think that is for the better of the show. I think it speaks to how superficial Peter's desires are, but also it speaks to the fact that Simone is probably just doing this as a power play. She doesn't really like Peter that much, but she sees it as a good way in. I also really appreciate that Megan Fahey kind of loses this show. You know, she kind of is the loser in this. She has to go home without her sister and continue to seemingly take care of her dad. And I think it feels like a Shakespearean tragic ending. And I just wish I connected with all these moments leading up to this ending more. I wish all these character moments landed, because the ending where Devon and Kiki are talking on the boat really worked for me. And I like that not only is Devon leaving alone without her sister, but she's also leaving with the person that made her sister the way she is now. You know, they both kind of lose Simone in this ending, and I actually think it really, really works. On top of that, I actually think the show was nailing some of the parallels throughout the show. I know so many people are really disappointed with the lack of supernatural twist here, but I actually kind of liked that there's this paranoia around cults and this existential supernatural feeling, but really it just boils down to paranoia and wanting to find an excuse for Simone's change in character. You know, Devon seemingly wants to believe that there's like some brainwashing or some cult-like aspect going on, because it makes it easier to stomach the fact that Simone has essentially just decided she's too good for her family, too good for Devon, too good for her past, too good for her dad. And I actually think that's a really powerful ending, but I think, unfortunately, I don't think the show kind of nailed its messaging and nailed its writing to have this conclusion land. It doesn't feel like this devastating twist as much as it feels like a unsatisfying, dissatisfying ending for some people. And I get why it's landing that way. My thing is, I don't think this was a fully satisfying show, but I think the ending, like on paper, works really, really well. I also have to give credit to the show. I think the backstory is really well done. I think you get why Simone would kind of gravitate towards Kiki as a maternal figure, and almost there is this like psychosexual nature going on throughout it as well. And there is this angle of kind of sexual sirens throughout the early chunk of the series, where they're all using their looks, using their sexuality to get what they want. And I feel like the show kind of subverts that as the season carries on, and it starts feeling like actually this is more desperation rather than a true power they hold. I think the show positions you to see them all three of them at times, as kind of these sexual beings that are like twisting people to kind of do their bidding. And by the end of the show, you realize it's almost using sexuality out of desperation. It isn't actually a power. And I think that is maybe the subversive nature of what they were trying to do. And I think in the end, like, Peter is kind of the siren with his wealth and power instead. And I actually like that twist. Again, there's so much stuff I really like in this show, but all these moments just don't land. I wasn't particularly connected with the dad storyline at a certain point. I found the proposal subline, was his name Ethan? Ethan and Simone didn't really land for me. It kind of, I found that whole subplot really kind of fell apart as the show went on. I also found as the show went on, I stopped really rooting for Devon and her struggles. I found her arguments with her ex really not that engaging. And I think the show, weirdly enough, even though it was only 5 episodes, I felt like it kind of became a little unfocused. I almost feel like this would have been better as a really solid 2.5 hour to 3 hour movie, because at 5 hours, there were so many sections where I was like, can we speed it along? And it's really weird to say that when it's only 5 episodes long, but yeah, the show didn't look very good. It didn't sound very good, but the performances were so good. And I do really feel like there was a lot of potential here. And I just think the potential was a little squandered, in my opinion, and I think the ending was satisfying to a point, like I appreciate Simone kind of looking out. We can assume that Simone is going to go through the same cycle with Peter. The only advantage she has is time. Peter is a lot older than her, so Peter might eventually, pass away, and then she can actually inherit all this stuff. But as it stands, the ending to me feels like it's communicating that she's just going to be another part of Peter's cycle, another part essentially go through what Kiki went through. But I will say, I thought the portrayal of like symbiotic relationships in this show was really, really strong. I think the way Simone and Kiki kind of needed each other really spoke to this sort of type of work. Like even me, for example, I take care of someone, and I find like the amount of kind of like codependency we have on each other, the way we communicate, like that can be a lot of times, like the level to which you need to know each other, the level to which you both rely on each other to communicate effectively, and how much you need to kind of understand can be a lot of times. It takes up a lot of mental energy. You carry that kind of tension and anxiety about one another throughout your day-to-day life, and I feel like this show captured that really well. I feel like you can really feel Devon's care for Simone. Like she really desperately wants to get Simone out of this situation, but Simone doesn't want to get out of that situation. She doesn't feel like she needs help. And at the same time, you can't really blame her given where she's come from. So I feel like all this stuff was just really well written, but it wasn't really well realized. It was a really good pitch, and it just didn't fully come together well. And I think this show is doing really well, and it's landing #1 on Netflix because it's got a great cast. It's got a really solid premise, and I think people are really drawn in for the first 2 or 3 episodes. And then I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people just aren't finishing this limited series, because I think it just, pacing wise, it starts to fall apart, and it just overall makes for a really unsatisfying experience. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider getting a membership to this channel or to my Patreon. I do a fortnightly podcast where I talk about everything I've watched in a given month or fortnight, depending how often I upload them. So it's every single movie or show I've watched, as well as Broadway, books, music, anything. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and have a lovely day.